In today's Farm Report, this week we've been focusing on cattle health, and while the majority of the information has focused on adult cattle, calves are also important, as Jim Salfer with the University of Minnesota Extension Service Office shares some information and new data on automated calf feeders.
I'm going to continue on my theme that I've been talking about this week, nutrition, but I'm going to change gears a little bit and talk specifically about automated calf feeders. I shouldn't say just, about 9 months ago, we kind of finished collecting data for a trial that we did. I would suspect there's probably some listeners out here that were involved with our trial. We basically randomized all the farms we could find with calf feeders, and a lot of those successful calf feeders, we didn't try to pick successive ones, we just picked anybody with a calf feeder, but we've got a lot of them in central Minnesota, and so I know a number of producers that were involved with that trial. But I'm not going to talk a lot about the trial, just some of the observations we have as we go to these farms with people with automatic calf feeders that kind of make them successful. First of all, I think you need to make sure that you get them off to a good start. There's kind of 3 different ways people typically start them. Some will start them right on the feeder. It takes a lot more work to get those calves up and competing with some of the older calves. Probably the most popular way to start calves is, maybe 3 days to 7 days after calving, after they're born. So they're really up and they're going well, and then they'll put them on the calf feeder. And there's a few farms that'll wait maybe 10 days to 2 weeks to make sure those calves are really eating well. They're more aggressive. They can compete a little bit better with some of the older calves that might be in the pen. I can take you to farms that are really having fairly good luck with all of them. It's a little bit about your management style. You really do need good calf observation. It sort of swaps. If you're going to put in a calf feeder, it sort of swaps the mundaneness of scrubbing the pails and making sure everything is clean to kind of making sure your feeder is clean and really good calf observation. Because, when they are together like this, there's a little bit more risk. Just like when you take your kids to a daycare, there's a little more risk they're going to get a cold, a little more risk they're going to get some diarrhea and some health issues. So you just really have to watch that very closely and catch those calves really early. The other thing is you need to make sure that your ventilation is correct in those buildings. That's not that hard. There's a lot of good people around that do ventilation. Most of these facilities have positive pressure tubes in them. If you do that, just make sure they're designed correctly, and so you kind of evenly distribute the air. The goal with those is to really get the throw of air out of the holes so it gets down to about 60 feet per minute at the calf level, and 60 feet per minute is considered not draft. You really can't hardly feel it, but it's still moving some air to distribute fresh air. And the main reason we need that in these calf barns is they really don't generate enough heat. In our naturally ventilated barns, typically we use thermal buoyancy, which means cows generate the heat, that hot air rises and goes out the top. These calves are so small they don't generate a lot of that, so we really need to a better job of mechanical ventilation to distributing that air. So I know there's a lot of them around, a lot of people are successful, and just visit with some of those folks or give us a call, and hopefully keep watching for some of the research that we've done, and we'll be completing the statistics shortly. This has been Jim Salfer with the University of Minnesota Extension in St. Cloud.
Will a farmer's choice of one of the new farm programs, either Ag Risk Coverage ARC or Price Loss Coverage PLC, have any effect on that farmer's decisions on how much of what crops to plant this season?
We like to think that our farm programs are decoupled and they don't affect planting decisions. First of all, I'll say that.
Agriculture Department grains analyst Jerry Norton telling USDA's Outlook Forum that 20, 30 years ago, farmers may have planted for the program, but the way these programs are set up, that really is not feasible.
The issue about whether you would plant to collect money doesn't really come into it, since it's paid on base acres and base yields that are historic. So I don't know how farmers look at it in terms of a risk management option, but there always is crop insurance too. So I'm not sure these things, the existing programs, ARC or PLC, have a big impact on acreage decisions for farmers.
Most likely it's the other way around. As farmers had the option of reallocating their base acres, it may be more a situation of farmers choosing which program to go with, ARC or PLC, to line up with their planting and production plans, not the other way around. Gary Crawford for the U.S. Department of Agriculture, Washington.
Nutrition for cattle in lactation is important, but so is for cows that may be dry, especially if you don't want them to build up resistance to such as insulin. Jim Salfer with the University of Minnesota Extension Service Office has more.
Earlier in the week, I've been talking about kind of a nutrition theme. I'm going to continue with that today, except I'm going to be talking about dry cows. And I think over the last 20 years, we've really all come to learn that this is really important 20 years ago when I was doing nutrition and milking cows, we kind of said, well, we'll throw our dry cows out with our heifers. We don't really care what they eat. They're not making any milk anyway. Let's just try to feed them as cheap as we can and get on with our life, and we'll worry about those milking cows. But as cows have become higher and higher producing, and as we've learned a lot more about what affects transition challenges with calves, we've really learned that dry cow feeding, even far off dry cow feeding, really has a pretty big influence on how that cow performs after calving. And one of the biggest reasons is kind of something that we're just starting to do a lot of research on and trying to understand is these cows kind of get insulin resistant if we feed way too much energy. There was some early research out of Wisconsin that kind of promoted high energy diets right before calving, where they actually took the feed the calves didn't eat and stuffed it into the rumen. And Jim Drakely at Illinois is a good friend of mine, and we had some discussions. He said, I don't like that data coming out of Wisconsin. He said, I think it's the drop in intake because they stuffed that feed in there. And he said, I've got some research that'll show if I limit feed cows, they go through transition period very well. And of course, Jim Drakely's been doing most of this research, and indeed he was correct. It's really this it's trying to maintain that intake through calving, and you can't do that on these high energy diets. These cows really dropped that last week, and so it's important to look at your dry cows, balance those diets well, and really don't overfeed them energy. And that's hard not to do, as hard as that sounds. We need to, of course, most people now are feeding straw or a lot of grass hay, and that's really the right thing to do. And the real reason is physiologically, these cows seem to almost get insulin resistant during that period of time if we feed too high energy diets. And insulin resistance is really about the same thing people with type 2 diabetes has. They produce a normal amount of insulin, but their cells are resistant to uptake, their receptors. So it's a little bit what happens to these cows, and then they just don't adapt very well after calving metabolically. And so if you're having some issues with that and these cows are not adjusting really well, visit with your nutritionist, visit with your veterinarian, see if you can change those diets and really try to get these cows so they go through that transition period, and watch cows as they approach calving. If they're really starting to drop off, now all cows drop a lot the day and two before after calving, but if they're starting to drop off about a week or so before calving, if you can measure that at all, you might want to visit with your nutritionist and see if you can change that. This has been Jim Selfer with the University of Minnesota Extension in St. Cloud.
This time last year, the hog industry was greatly concerned about porcine epidemic diarrhea virus and its impacts on litter populations. Since that time, USDA has ordered required reporting of PED virus cases as well as swine Delta coronavirus to slow down spread of these diseases. Liz Wagstrom of the National Pork Producers Council says since June,
our number of accessions, the actual number of submissions going into the laboratory every week, stayed pretty similar, about 800 all along. We've got some ups and downs, and we've had very steady numbers of positive cases.
And compared to this time in 2014, reported cases of PED are down significantly. Wagstrom says this is due to improved biosecurity measures, larger numbers of swine herds tested due to diagnostic test funding from USDA's Animal and Plant Health Inspection Service, and repeated testing of sites to confirm negative status of PED. I'm Rod Bain reporting for the U.S. Department of Agriculture in Washington, D.C.
Marketing one's products, whether it be to hold their product until more favorable times or when to sell, can be unpredictable and a psychological decision, as Jim Selfer with the University of Minnesota Extension Service Office shares.
I think if you look at the research of making decisions in human beings, we all make real irrational, sort of emotional kind of decisions. I probably can't wait for the day I can just punch in something into a computer and it'll punch out what the best decision for me to make. I think that's particularly true when it deals with marketing, whether it's crop producers dealing with marketing, livestock producers dealing with marketing, and marketing is reasonably new in the dairy industry, maybe the last 10 years or so. And it's interesting watching producers as prices go up and down, think about their marketing and should they be locking in milk. So I'm going to just go through, some marketing expert actually came through with a little bit of psychology and how to deal with marketing and some of the major mistakes that he sees producers make. And kind of the same thing I do. And again, I'm not trying to pick on any producers. This is really hard. I don't know what it would be as if Bev Durgan said, you can kind of pick your salary. You can pick a 0.5% raise for the next 3 years, or you can kind of go with the market, and it might vary between a decrease in your salary to a 3% increase in your salary, how you might be able to pick and choose that. So it is a really difficult decision. But one of the things I think producers or marketers even and brokers make a mistake on is they think they've got the market figured out. Got a really good friend that's a major marketer, and we worked together for a number of years, and he would have a lot of producers ask him, and this was cropping, what the prices were going to do. Are prices too high or too low? And he always said the prices are exactly where they should be because everybody's getting all the grain that they want, and seems like people are willing to sell at this price. And so I think we need to try not to outsmart the market, to think, well, we're smarter. Now you can look at trends like the last half of 2014. It was fun. I was on a lot of farms, and the brokers were saying, oh man, we don't want to lock in for 2015. And in the back of my mind, I was thinking, we're way over the world market. So we're not going to be, our exports are bound to drop. We've got real low feed costs. So why would we think prices are going to stay real high moving into 2015? Now they dropped some, starting about Labor Day or so. And I'm not saying I'm smart. I think don't try to outsmart the market or believe you can beat it. I think just look at the information and try and be as objective as you can. I think the other time we often do short-term thinking, and again, that's hard. It's really hard when you're getting $23 in your milk check to lock in a future price that's 18. But sometimes if you look at all the signals and it looks like 18 might be a good price, maybe it's right to do that. So these are just a couple of things that my observations, and also was in this article I was reading talking about the psychology of markets. So it's one of those things, don't try to beat the market. Either you need to be in it or you kind of need to be out of it. And I think with the new MPP program, maybe for a lot of producers, just using that as an insurance policy is the best solution for a lot of them. This has been Jim Selfer with University of Minnesota Extension in St. Cloud.
For the fourth month in a row, the inventory of cattle and calves in feedlots is above what it was a year earlier, but one analyst says this cannot go on.
We will be pulling these numbers down as we move forward through the year.
Agriculture Department livestock analyst Cheo Shagam says the proof of that statement is in this past Friday's USDA cattle feedlot report showing that during January, producers placed into feedlots 11% fewer animals than in January a year ago, and that low number going in
Reinforces the idea that we are very, very tight supplies of cattle. Likely we have producers that are also hanging on to heifers for breeding, and the definite signs that we're going to be rebuilding the herd in the coming years.
But while that process goes on, the result's going to be
progressively tighter supplies of cattle as we move forward.
Another telling number, the marketings of fed cattle out of feedlots last month, down 9% from a year ago, the lowest January marketing since at least 1996. That's when USDA started keeping track. Gary Crawford for the U.S. Department of Agriculture.